It is a Friday afternoon on the show that shakes the Southland Clemson Sports Talk. Roddy Jones from the ACC Network joins us. And Roddy, speaking of shaking the Southland, the whole landscape of college football got shook up yesterday with the news that Southern Cal and UCLA will be joining the Big Ten in 2024. Your initial thoughts when that news started to filter out?
I think it's shock more than anything, and there's sort of a denial that goes along with it. Like, can this be true? Is there any way that this is false? And really, the only time that one of these has come out and it's been false has been Texas to the Pac-12. But since then, John Skipper, who was the president of ESPN at the time, basically said Texas to the Pac-12 was a done deal. To the Pac-10 at the time was a done deal, but ESPN came in and saved basically the Big 12 through the Longhorn Network and distribution of an unequal distribution of what was going to be the new Big 12. So that was really, that being the only time it was really wrong when these reports came out. You sort of had to start the shock of, wow, I did not obviously see this coming. You know, we kind of get lulled into this false sense of security, yelling at each other about NIL and transfer portal as like things that are going to fundamentally change college football. But like while we're all yelling at each other about what the student athletes are doing, the grown-ups in the room are scheming to basically crater an entire conference. So I'm just really glad that we all got distracted by that stuff and stopped asking the questions that were really important. Like, hey, what the hell is this alliance going to be? What is it going to do, and what's it going to protect? And the answer is absolutely nothing. So I was pretty surprised, and there was some of the cynicism that came with the rest of it. But it's certainly something that changes the landscape of college sports.
Roddy, in your estimation, we now have two leagues with 16 teams, with the Big Ten and the SEC. Does this lead to those leagues going to 18 or 20 or more, or does it lead to the the ACC adding a couple of ball clubs? I mean, which direction do you think this thing plays out?
Well, I think it's very clear on the on the SEC Big Ten front that they are not done. I think the Big Ten will be more aggressive in the short term, and the SEC is going to play the long game. Because if you're looking at the future on who you would want to add, the SEC is going to have to wait for Clemson, for Florida State, for Miami to be closer towards the end of the ACC's grant of rights to go after those schools. The Big Ten, on the other hand, has the ability. The Big Ten, on the other hand, has the ability to go after some of the West Coast schools. You know, we got word that Oregon and Washington are absolutely not moving. I don't think that's the case. Like with the Big Ten, like I don't know if the Big Ten can approach them, but maybe those administrators reach out, which would be irresponsible if they didn't. If they were to reach out, like Southern Cal and UCLA need a West Coast contingent to continue to play, so it makes sense, especially for their non-revenue sports. So I could see them being aggressive. If I'm the Big 12, I'm, taking an aggressive standpoint. I'm going to play some offense, see if you can get Utah, see if you can get Colorado, see if you can get the Arizona schools. And I think the ACC should look to be aggressive as well. Notre Dame is all but off the table at this point, but can you figure out some other schools so that you can solidify your conference? Because right now, I think there's a real debate to be had on which conference has more long-term stability, the Big 12 or the ACC. Because I would argue it's the Big 12 because of where they have ended up in this whole thing and their ability to be aggressive with some schools that really make sense. Whereas the ACC is kind of a target going forward unless it's aggressive and starts to add some. So I think the Big 10, the SEC are certainly going to grow. When that's going to happen, I don't know. But the ACC should be aggressive, and the the Big 12 should be as well.
I heard several people talking about, and it's funny because in this business, I don't know how you are about it, but I try not to listen to other people's opinions because I have to formulate my own. But I heard people that said yesterday they believe that with this move, the Big Ten and the SEC, Roddy, can sort of dictate the terms of what a championship is going to be in college football. Do you buy into that theory, or do you still see that this Power Five, so to speak, that's existed will continue to press forward with the college football playoff?
It's a great question. So I am of the belief that the more powers that the Big Ten and SEC snap up, the less power that other people have. I mean, what leverage does the Pac-12 have now in negotiations if the if the SEC and the Big Ten all of a sudden say, hey, look, we want we're going to guarantee 4 conferences. You could certainly get the group of 5 on board with that. That's one less conference that's got a guarantee and one more at-large bid. So I would assume the votes are going to be there if it's what the SEC and the SEC and the Big Ten want. So yeah, I absolutely think that they can dictate the terms, and it will continue. So I think the Pac-12 and the ACC are going to look back at voting against expansion, guaranteeing their league's entry into this playoff. They're going to look back at that and look at it as probably a mistake, because if now the Big Ten and the SEC go in and they say, hey, look, here's what we want. We want guarantees for the 2 highest ranked conference champions or the 3 highest ranked conference champions, and the rest are at large bids. The group of 5 is almost certainly going to sign up for that. The only people that would be against it now are the Pac-12, maybe the Big 12 and the ACC. And when you've got a majority vote, like, it completely changes the dynamic. So in many ways, and look, if the Big Ten and the SEC want to go the other way and give more guarantees and squeeze Notre Dame out of this thing so that Notre Dame has to be forced to join a league, they can do that as well. Like, the chips are squarely in their corner, and they are going to dictate what this thing looks like going forward. And if the ACC and the Pac-12 and the Big 12 get squeezed to the point where they don't have as advantageous a deal as they once did, they'll have their own stubbornness with the inability to expand early to blame for it.
He's on Twitter at Roddy Jones 20. You know what it reminds me of? It's kind of ironic that in the sports media business, we've talked and had to kind of focus on the Live Golf Tour and how that's sort of affected the PGA Tour and the players, and it feels a little bit like that. Like, if you imagine a world where the SEC and the Big Ten, Roddy, begin to dictate the terms of what college football is going to look like to everybody else, then it's sort of like this whole different ball of wax. Now, you played in the ACC at Georgia Tech. I obviously went to school in the ACC at Clemson. Is this stable ground right now for this league, or do programs around the conference have to worry about maybe Clemson or Florida State or Miami figuring a way out of the league into one of these other conferences?
Well, I want to touch on what you said first about it feeling like the Live Golf Tour, and I'm gonna push back on that just a little bit. And because it does in some ways, like, it's the valuable properties in an entity who have been somewhat taken advantage of, or have been not recognizing their full value, realizing, hey, I have more value than that, and going somewhere else. It is that. What it is most directly connected to, or most directly similar to, is what happened in English football, English soccer, in the late 80s, early 1990s, when they formed the Premier League. Manchester United and Tottenham and Arsenal and Liverpool, they realized that they could do better from a media rights standpoint by joining together and selling their rights to TV and making this a TV-driven entity. And that's how the Premier League was formed. And now it is the most wildly successful league in the history of human existence. and certainly in right now.
Yeah.
And that is what this is tracking towards. It's the brands bonding together and saying we are worth more all together rather than being splintered across. So that's where we're going. In terms of the ACC, the grant of rights runs through 2036. So I think in the short term, and I say the short term is like up till 2030, let's say, I think the league is fairly safe and stable. But during that time, the media rights distribution for the Big Ten and the SEC is going to grow so much that the thing that keeps the league together for the short term is really going to doom it in the long term, because the difference in media distribution at that point is going to be so great that it would be, quite honestly, financially irresponsible for the leadership of Clemson, of Miami, of Florida State, those brands that seem valuable and may have the ability to take to have those conversations. Duke and Carolina as a package deal for basketball alone is worth something. It's irresponsible for them not to listen to it financially. And if you want to go back to the nostalgia piece, that only gets you to, like, that's only worth a certain number of millions of dollars. And I have a feeling those other conferences, their offers would be more than those millions of dollars. So I think long term, if we're looking at 2040, what does the league look like? I think that's a legitimate question. 2030, I think it looks very similar to what it does now.
Roddy Jones, with so many things I could ask you, I want to reference your Premier League comments. Do you suggest that maybe there'll be a day where there is like relegation in college sports, where the lowest teams drop down and some of the higher bottom level teams, group of 5 teams, so to speak, jump up?
I don't know. I hope so. I actually really do hope so, because it sort of provides that movement that I think the teams below would want, like the ability to climb up, the ability to rise above your station and to enter into the big boy leagues. So I hope so. I don't know though. Like, this country isn't really familiar with it, although we're getting more familiar with it through the English Premier League.
Yeah.
So maybe what I do think is going to happen, and I don't know when it happens, but I do think the league, like the SEC, for instance, is going to start to look around and say, "Hey, Vanderbilt, what are you doing here? Like, we can get rid of you and replace you with Oklahoma State. Like, that makes us marginally better. Like, Oklahoma State isn't going to. It's not like adding Oklahoma, but it's better than having Vanderbilt. So I do think there would be a measure of that in these leagues at some point, where, and maybe it's Vanderbilt saying, "Hey, look, we don't want to play this game anymore. Like, we are just getting trounced every single week, and there's no way. So we'll go to another league. We'll protect our Olympic sports, and in football, we're just not going to do this." Now, the money would suggest that would be, again, financially irresponsible. But I do think at some point these leagues are going to start to cut some of the schools that are in them. So long term, if you're not a school that's heavily invested in football or in a football footprint, or you have struggling attendance, that's worrisome for you.
Roddy Jones with us here on the program. So, Roddy, final couple of things. I know you got to get out of here. You mentioned the fact that you felt like the ACC was good for a while. My question would be, when the landscape is changing like this, grant of rights deals, et cetera, I mean, would there not be a situation where a team could say, in court or wherever it would end up, say, "Look, we saw this thing falling apart around us. We just were trying to get out before the house collapsed"? I mean, I don't know, like, what makes there a belief, in your opinion, that nobody from the ACC would just go ahead and jump on board to get out in front? Because the worst scenario for anybody is being left out. It's kind of like the Notre Dame effect, so to speak, just for teams that are currently in conferences. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest fear of everybody who's not in one of those leagues right now is that when the music stops, you are left on the outside looking in, and you're not able to compete for the level to the level that you would like to, especially if you're one of those schools that has a rabid fan base that expects to be good in football. And so, like, if you're an NC State, you're terrified, because right now you are on the outside looking in, and your fan base does expect to be playing big time football. Same to Pittsburgh, which the fan base isn't quite as extensive as NC State, at least if you look at the attendance in Heinz Field. But it's a group that has a tradition that expects to be playing high level football. So to answer your question, what makes me confident that no one will challenge it? Nothing, because according to what the reports are about the grant of rights, it seems to be, and I'm using air quotes when I say this, it seems to be fairly airtight. However, courts, if you get into the right one, can be friendly towards an organization over one of these media rights deals. So look, I don't know. I think it probably wouldn't hurt, other than financially and maybe a little bit with public opinion, for one of these schools. And to be quite honest, the one that you cover the most is probably the most likely, because they're the most valuable, to challenge it in court and see if they can get out of it a little bit early, or at least with a lesser penalty. Because the thing that really keeps this thing together is the fact that the league owns the media rights of those institutions through 2036, no matter where they are. So if they're in the Big Ten, then the league owns the media rights that you would get from the Big Ten or the distribution. So that's kind of what keeps it together. Somebody probably is going to challenge it in court because it's what we do, and likely it ends in a settlement because that's, again, what we do.
Roddy Jones again on Twitter at Roddy Jones 20. Roddy, always appreciate your insight, man, and looking forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks at the ACC kickoff.
Yeah, brother. I'm sure it'll be a very eventful time. Appreciate you having me on.